It is that time of the month again. We are here for a wrap up. So the month of February is a shorter month, so I didn't do 2 wrap up videos. Yes, it's only shorter by like 2 days, but who's counting? This month was great. I just want to get right into all of these books and then we can talk about what my plans are for March. So let's talk about the first book I read in the month of February. First thing I read this month was The Gray Man. I started it at the end of January as just something to read. I was laying in bed, I finished a book and I didn't know what to read next. So I just grabbed the nearest book to me and it was right on my headboard along with the rest of the Mark Greaney books. And I just cracked it open. I haven't read it in probably 15 years and man, that book is good. It is, like I said in a previous video, very war on terror at the time, which makes sense. I mean, if you were writing thrillers in 2009, how could you write one that didn't involve the war on terror? But very quickly, it transitioned to taking place in Europe. And for anyone that doesn't know, The Gray Man is about court gentry, and he is a former CIA operative turned assassin. And the reason he is an assassin is because he was burned by the CIA. They turned on him for some reason he still doesn't know. And a lot of the early books are him trying to figure out pieces of that. And one of my favorites in the series is when he does finally find out why they burned him or gets revenge on the people that did kind of thing. Can't remember. That one takes place in DC and it is really good. But yeah, The Gray Man is fantastic. It's just as good the second time. I think that some of the things that Mark Greaney excels at show up in this, but a lot of his like black humor that Court has later in the series really isn't here until the very end of the book. I mean, like the last couple of chapters, and maybe that was just part of finding Court's voice because it really picks up in the second book. I've started skimming on Target and I'm looking forward to reading that soon. My wife just finished the first Gray Man novel and she loved it, and so we are gonna slowly, like maybe one a month, read the entire series together. So you'll be seeing more Gray Man reviews as we go through the year. I really think anyone that reads thrillers and isn't averse to ones that involve like assassins should definitely check out The Gray Man. Let's see what I read next. The Warhound and the World's Pain by Michael Moorcock. This is a Von Beck novel and it is very good. Didn't realize that Michael Moorcock took all of the things I enjoy and put them into a single book. We have a German soldier from the 30 Years' War. Everything is very heavily inspired by 17th century Germany. I really like it. It involves Von Beck meeting the devil and being given a mission to save his soul and the soul of the woman he loves, and that mission is to find the Holy Grail and help the devil cure the world's pain. It's so cool. This has the best characterization of the devil I have ever read. It is so good. He is so insidious and like 200 IQ, just a magnificent character. And the whole time I'm reading it, I don't know if I believe what the devil is saying, but he seems very sincere, but you know, that's kind of what he does. So I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to reading more Von Beck. I like Von Beck more than I like Elric so far. There's a lot more Elric, which leads to a higher percentage of there being bad Elric because Michael Moorcock was very inconsistent during his career. So maybe that's part of it. I think The Warhound and the World's Pain just happened to be a banger and the first thing I read of Von Beck. While Elric, I've read like the first 3 in chronological order and they're not bad, but I think I haven't read the good stuff yet. So we'll see if I change my mind later on. Of course, next we've got Free Falling Crimson, book 19 in the Travis McGee series. This takes place right after the Green Ripper. This is one of the first ones where I've realized Travis McGee was getting older. Fun fact, these books happened in the year they were published, pretty much. So the early ones, McGee is like 30 years old. But by the time we get to this one, he's like 50 or he's 51. Because I think at one point he says that his birthday ended in a 0 and he fought in the Korean War. So like the math checks out that he was born in 1930. Not only was this book the first time I realized McGee was aging, this book was the first time I realized Florida had changed around him in such a drastic way that his lifestyle is no longer sustainable. The stakes are too high. We're talking about 1981. In South Florida, you got Miami, you got all the drug trade, the crime. We're coming up on Scarface levels of danger, and that's not what McGee does. McGee finds things that are missing and he takes a cut. But when your things are missing and they've been taken by Cuban drug lords, the risk isn't worth it, even for McGee. The stakes have just gotten way too high. And this book shows that, but in a different way. In this one, McGee sets out to investigate the death of an ailing millionaire. He got his like head caved in at like a rest stop on the side of the road in rural Florida. And that leads to McGee checking out a motorcycle gang, pornographic movie makers, and then it ends in a place I would have never expected Travis McGee to go, and it has such a dark ending. And these books are kind of known for dark endings, but this one just made you feel wrong. The whole situation he's in the last third of the book, it just feels creepy and weird. So yeah, of course, this one was really good. It's like a 5-star McGee novel. I seriously never expected 17 years into writing these that John D. MacDonald would still be cranking out absolute bangers. Speaking of absolute bangers and John D. MacDonald, I immediately followed that up with Cinnamon Skin, book 20 in the series. So at the end of book 19, McGee's best friend Meyer has like this traumatic event, and a lot of Cinnamon Skin is McGee helping Meyer kind of get back on the horse. Not the solving mysteries and cracking skulls horse, that's not what Meyer does, but a little piece of Meyer was taken away by that traumatic event, and McGee, being like the real friend that he is to Meyer, is willing to do whatever it takes to help him kind of get back his self-respect. And Cinnamon Skin starts with a traumatic event, a mystery where Meyer's boat is blown up and they don't know why. So McGee goes to Mexico to try to solve this case. And this case is just so strange. I really enjoyed him going back to Mexico. I don't know what it is with John D. MacDonald in Mexico, but like 4 McGee novels have him going there, which is great. I really like it. And he never goes back to the same place twice, which is also fun. This one is like a little weaker than most of the others surrounding it. I think he kind of recycled a couple of plot points in here, and I don't really like the woman that McGee is kind of flirting with or whatever associated with in this book, because they're not always different in every book, but you know, he usually finds himself a lady at some point in these books, and the one in here is like, okay, she's a bit of a trope, but that's not what we're here for. What we're here for is the ending and the antagonist, who is terrifying. I mean, sociopathic, terrifying. The other thing in this book is they travel all over Texas, and at one point they're listing off places, and I'd been to all of them, and every time he named a place, I was just like, whoa, this is weird. And, you know, this book's from 1982, so I'm thinking about these places and what they looked like in 1982, and it just amplified my immersion, which is hard to do when it's John D. MacDonald, because that man is the master of writing you into a place and you really feel like you are there. So Cinnamon Skin wasn't as good as some of the surrounding books, but it's still like a 4-star read. I really liked it. And yet again, the stakes are just so high in these books because the world has become significantly more dangerous. And I think it's just really interesting seeing what John D. MacDonald is doing with McGee as he is getting older and the world is changing. So a lot of my reading this year, it's kind of obvious at this point, has been a mix of John D. MacDonald and Lois McMaster Bujold, who in my recent video I announced is my project for 2025. I'm reading everything she's written this year, pending the inability to read or some catastrophic event, of course. And Penric's Mission is wonderful. I had been told that Penric's Mission is one of the better books in the series, and holy crap, it is. I love this book. The premise is Penric is going to Thassalon as a spy. He has like his hair dyed and he's like in a disguise. He's supposed to be like a merchant or something. Within like 10 minutes of him getting off the boat where he's supposed to be a spy, he is caught. So like that's literally the first couple pages. He's on the boat, kind of doing stuff, worried about being a spy, and then bam, he gets caught. He gets his head cracked, like literally a skull gets cracked, and Desdemona has to use a lot of resources to try to keep Penric alive, and then he wakes up in an inescapable prison cell, and he's left there for Penric doesn't even know how long, and then it goes from there. He has to try and escape, and after that, the rest of the book happens. Yet again, we have Bujold writing heartfelt, beautiful stories that involve just being a decent person, which I don't know why I have to keep saying that, but why is there not more fantasy where people are just being decent? In this story, Penric has to help someone and he has to do things that he does not enjoy, and you get a little backstory on why Penric does not want to be a doctor. The best sorcerers in this world are healers, because healing magic is very hard. It's hard on the sorcerer and it's hard on the demon, like the keeping the balance of chaos and order, because you're using kind of uphill magic, which demons don't like doing, and it takes a toll on the sorcerer, like a very heavy toll. Not to mention, you're trying to help people in a world that doesn't have antibiotics, in a world that doesn't have modern medicine. And so you see a lot of people die. And if you are good at your job, then they're going to keep sending you the worst of the worst, and it's going to destroy you emotionally. Anyways, there's a little digression about the world of the 5 gods and Penric himself. The book's very good. There is a pattern to this reading, as I mentioned before. And the next book, yep, part of the same pattern of constantly reading John D. MacDonald and Lois McMaster Bujold. The final Travis McGee book, The Lonely Silver Rain. John D. MacDonald passed away not too long after this book was published from complications in heart surgery. And I know a lot of people are concerned about whether or not the series has an ending, which I don't think it matters. That's not what these books are about. But this book is the perfect ending to the Travis McGee series. I don't want to spoil why. All I will say is this book has one of those endings that is a beginning. I think that you see that Travis McGee's life has changed drastically over the years, and that the world has changed around him in ways that makes a lot of what he does untenable. And then there is this big revelation in this book that kind of feels forced, but also not. It's so beautifully written that I don't care. It is a new beginning for McGee that just could have set up later books, but also can just be closure for the people who've enjoyed reading these stories for all these years. This book means the world to me. It is one of my favorites in the series. I think part of that is because I am so emotionally invested in them now, but also it is perfect. I say that something feels a little forced, but like I said, any forcing of a plot or something in a book can easily be overlooked if it is executed well. The same thing goes with tropes, and John D. MacDonald is like the master of executing a story well. I adore this book. I think anyone that enjoys crime novels and thrillers should read these books. People like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and John Saul call him the master of the genre for a reason. These books are the gold standard in the genre. I cannot recommend them enough. I am heartbroken that I have finished reading them all. What that means is now I get to read them all again, and I get to see McGee when he was younger. I was going to say in his prime, but your boy was always in his prime. I've just loved these books so much. I want to make a video where I talk about every single book, and maybe I'll do that sometime soon, but let's just move on to what I read for the rest of the month. So When the Lion Feeds by Wilbur Smith is on my 40 before 40 list, and I have been trying to read this for 2.5 years now. I started it on audio, and the audio was just very faint, like the narrator. It was hard to hear. So I couldn't listen to it where I normally listen to audiobooks because it's a little too loud, and I don't want to crank it up enough that I'm going deaf. Trying to preserve my hearing. You know, I got a long life to live, and I would like to hear sounds other than the lovely tinnitus sounds. This book is fantastic. I am kind of mad at myself that it took so long for me to finally get back to it, but I hopped right back into it. I remembered everything from 2.5 years ago. It was written in such a way that it just stuck in my mind, and Wilbur Smith is a master of historical fiction. The story takes place in South Africa in the 1880s. You follow a member of the Courtney family, which ends up being a huge, expansive narrative that Wilbur Smith wrote for the next 35 years with like co-authors later on. This one follows Sean Courtney. He is the brother of Garrett Courtney, who is barely in this book. He's in it in the beginning, and that's one of my critiques of the book. Is it starts off written in a way that almost feels like you're going to be following both brothers, but then Sean Courtney takes off because something happens. He gets accused of something, and his brother disowns him basically, and he leaves. And so this is about Sean Courtney's life, mostly his life in his like 20s up to about 30 years old. And boy, does he live a life. He lives through the important historic touchstones of that era in South Africa. He's part of the last Zulu War as a volunteer. Then after being disowned by his family and running away, he goes on to meet a English nobleman who grew up in Canada, and they form a business where they start mining for gold, and they're part of the South African gold rush. And then they become part of the Johannesburg Masters of Industry, where they're wheeling and dealing in the stock exchange and betraying one another and just getting rich or die trying kind of thing. And through all of this, you see his victories, his defeats, his struggle to make something of himself, and his drive and his passion for not only business, but fighting and women, and more than women, just love and camaraderie. And speaking of camaraderie, this has some of the most beautiful writing when it comes to like the bond between two men, like friendship. It is hard to describe. I loved every second of it. Some of it was a little too spelled out for me, but even those moments were just so beautiful that I can just ignore him being like, hey, they really care about each other kind of thing. And this has one of the most heartbreaking deaths I've ever read in a book. Not only does he loses a friend in literally like the worst way possible, and it is a phobia of mine, and I'm not even going to go into it because it sucks and it hurts to talk about or read. This book would have been my book of the month had it not been for me reading The Lonely Silver Rain this month. It is wonderful. I will read more from Wilbur Smith, but I will say this book has an ending where you don't have to move on, but I do know that there are more, so I'm going to move on eventually, but I really liked it. You can just pick this up and read it and be done, and you will be very happy with what you experienced. It's so cool to see South Africa in the 1880s, and I want to add that Wilbur Smith doesn't really address a lot of the issues of the time. Well, he does and he doesn't, because he has this moment in here about trophy hunting and hunting for ivory where there is an important character in the book that straight up says, I don't think this is right. Killing these majestic animals is terrible, and I think you are less of a person for doing it. And Sean Courtney's like, this is my livelihood. I live for this. And the person's like, yeah, I know you do, and I'm doing my best not to judge you for it, and I understand that you have a drive to do this, and it is what is going to dig you out of poverty. And another thing, when there are Native Africans in this, they aren't caricatures, well, that I know of. They don't feel like caricatures to me. Maybe I'm not as well versed in how Zulus acted in the 1880s, but he has a companion that is a voluntary manservant. The guy is his guardian. He drives his carriage. He protects the people that matter to Sean Courtney. And at no point is there any coercion in their relationship. As a matter of fact, Courtney goes out of his way to hurt people that treat his Native African companion as less than a person. This book was banned in South Africa after it was published. And it's really funny because the reason they said they banned it was because of like the sex in the book, and that it just doesn't do anything to improve the English language, which it's like, what, bro? What level of hubris do you have that you get to decide whether or not a book improves society? But anyways, judges ruled against it being banned after he sued like multiple times to get it unbanned. I think that one of the reasons this book was banned in South Africa is because the main character treats the natives like they're people. And we're talking about 1960s South Africa. So that's just my theory. I'm pretty sure that the people in power were like, oh, wait, what? This affluent white guy is treating the Native Africans like they deserve respect? We can't have that. This book's got to get banned. But that's just my theory. Anyways, the book is very good. I highly recommend it to anyone that loves historical fiction. We have Lonesome Dove at the very top of my favorite historical fiction, along with like Ken Follett, just a hair below that, with his Century trilogy, excluding the last one because that one's bad, but the first two are worth reading on their own. I put this right around there. So far, I like Wilbur Smith more than Ken Follett because for some reason, Ken Follett really likes to make you hurt, and he comes across as a sexual deviant sometimes. So I like this one a little more than Ken Follett. And we'll see if that stays that way as I read more of both authors, or, I change my mind. So next on the list is a little nonfiction. I'm trying to read more nonfiction. I really want to reach my arbitrary goal of 20% of my reading of the year being nonfiction. And so I read War by Bob Woodward. Never read Bob Woodward before. The audiobook is narrated by Robert Petkoff, who narrates the McGee series, which was just cool. I kept listening to try to get little hints of McGee, but Petkoff is such an amazing narrator that he's completely different in this book. War by Bob Woodward is just talking about the Trump and Biden administration and the wars they dealt with. The war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and the war for the presidency. And it is very good. I had never read Bob Woodward, and this book is written in such a way that it almost reads like fiction. It is just so fast paced, and he does such a good job of interjecting these moments that feel like you would be reading in a fiction book, like the dialogue and the kind of back and forth and the momentum. I was really impressed with it, and I had wanted to read something like this. I kind of viewed this book as my, now I'm up to date on politics. I can go back to ignoring it and being sad for other reasons. So this one was just a really good way to become very informed on all three of those events. I had never heard anything about Biden kind of in the background because, there's all the memes about Biden not knowing where he is and all that, being kind of brain dead. But then you hear him kind of talking away from the cameras, and he comes across as a lot more coherent than he does in front of cameras, and it even addresses that. And the same thing with Trump. He has an interview with Trump from like 1986 or something that he talks about in the beginning of this book, and I was just borderline impressed with how coherent he came across. This book was just very interesting. I think the thing I enjoyed the most out of this was just understanding all of the events that led up to the invasion of Ukraine, and the fact that there was like a spy in the Kremlin, and we knew way ahead of time what was going to happen, and the US was doing everything it could to let everyone know that it was going to happen, and kept telling Russia, hey, we know what you're doing. Please don't. This will not go well. And Russia was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And what's crazy is like more than half of the people that the US tried to talk to on the Russian side didn't know what was going on. It was just Putin and a few people directly underneath him, and the rest of the people were left in the dark. So you have diplomats out there where the US is begging them, hey, come on, like, you got to stop this. And this diplomat's like, that's not real. I don't know what you're talking about. We are not going to be doing anything like that with Ukraine. And then bam, 2 days later it happens, and that diplomat looks like an idiot or a liar. Speaking of idiot or liar, that's a fun game to play when someone says something that's just so off the wall. I think Adam Carolla used to do it on his podcast, and it was called Stupid or Liar. And so that's fun to do when people say things that don't make any sense. Are you stupid or are you a liar? I guess Stupid or Liar is a good way to end the discussion about war by Bob Woodward. There's a lot of scheming and a lot of just nonsense in there that I had no idea had happened. And Woodward does such an excellent job of really showing what's going on behind the scenes, like when the cameras are off in the international political scene. So I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to kind of be up to date on this stuff. After that, I had to go back to Lois McMaster Bujold. I mean, she is my project for this year, and I read 2 of the books in a single day because they're novellas or novelettes or whatever. They're super small. And Mira's Last Dance is a direct sequel to Penric's Mission. Had I known that, I would have listened to it and the next one right after Penric's Mission. They feel like a trilogy that should be in like a single book, and good thing they are in Penric's Travels. It's a nice omnibus where you can read all 3 at once. Mira's Last Dance is about half the length of the previous book, Penric's Mission, and it is one of my favorites. Like, I love Penric's Mission, but I think Mira's Last Dance does the best job of showing how good Lois McMaster Bujold is at writing characters and how much she excels at both humor, but not in like a ha-ha funny way. There is a little bit of that here, but just the overall kind of tongue-in-cheek tone, and how good she is at writing those little moments between people that matter, the things you remember in your life. This book made me cry. This book made me laugh out loud, and it just made me feel better about being alive. And how often do you get to read fantasy where the tone of the novel is designed to make you feel better? It's cozy, fun, the stakes are still high. Like, I wouldn't call this cozy fantasy yet again because there's too much danger and risk in what the characters are doing, but this book is fantastic. Because the book was so fantastic and kind of ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, that I immediately went into The Prisoner of Lemnos, which is a direct sequel. I kind of call Penric's Mission, Mira's Last Dance, and The Prisoner of Lemnos a trilogy, the Sidonian trilogy. It all takes place in and around Sidonia, with the capital of that place being Thassalon. It feels very Byzantine Empire because of the backstabbing and the political machinations in the capital and how they kind of affect the countryside and the characters in the story. And The Prisoner of Lemnos is about Penric trying to bust someone out of prison. It's just perfect. Just like all the other Penric and Desdemona novels, you get these heartfelt moments. You get these wonderful characters. She can do no wrong. Plotting is perfect. The dialogue is one of those things I don't talk about very much. It's always good. I cannot think of something that she does poorly when it comes to writing. I mean, like, I'm going to be real with y'all. I had no idea that I was going to find a writer this good, this late into like my reading career. And she's been writing since the 80s. I feel dumb for not reading her stuff earlier, but I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much when I was younger. Like, people say books are different based on when you pick them up in your life, and I think that at this point in my life, this is exactly what I needed in my fantasy journey, and I am all for it, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in the series. I might start doing 2 a week. I don't even know. I decided to finish the month off with some nonfiction that I was chipping away at all month. It was kind of frustrating. I don't know why I was reading this book so slow, but it was part of my reading some more nonfiction, and I read By the Sword, A History of Gladiators, Musketeers, Samurai, Swashbucklers, and Olympic Champions by Richard Cohen. Holy crap, nonfiction books need to chill with the titles. This book is very good. It is a must read for anyone interested in swords. You have the history of sword making, sword fighting. A lot of this book covers dueling, which is really cool. And the way he wrote this book, each chapter either follows a region or a type of fighting, and he kind of picks up these important historical characters and you follow them, and he uses them to kind of give context to sword fighting at the time, and I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of fencing toward the end, which I didn't care about as much, but I mean, this guy was a fencer, and that is what sword fighting has become. I don't dock it any points because there's a lot of fencing in there, because duh. So I think the book is fantastic. There is a lot of knowledge in this book, and I think anyone that reads fantasy and is interested in the sword fighting should read this book. And if anyone out there is writing fantasy, you need to read this book. This book will fix all of your poor sword fighting decisions in your stories and will make you a very informed writer when it comes to the use of the blade. He even talks about that in there, that a lot of the sword fighting in Dumas books like The Three Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo. It's not very good, which is weird considering Dumas knew how to fight. He had been in a duel, and he claimed he was in a lot of duels, but most of his biographers agree that there was really only one, and in it he was just like slashing his sword around and acting super aggressive, and his opponent nicked his arm and he was like, "Oh, you made me bleed," and then the fight was over. So I thought that was hilarious. The book is very good. That is just like a couple pages in what ends up being like a 400-500 page book. I can't recommend it enough. I also found out that Richard Cohen wrote a book about how to write like Tolstoy. It's basically a book about how the great writers of the world wrote what they wrote, and I'm really looking forward to checking that out. And also, I read this book, Eyes on Paper, and then today, while I was adding it to my wrap up, I found out that there's an audiobook, and I'm like, what? I could have listened to this too? So mad at myself. Wow, that is one heck of a blurb on the cover by Simon Winchester. Like swordplay itself, By the Sword is elegant, accurate, romantic, and full of brio. I don't know what a brio is. The definitive study, hugely readable, of man's most deadly art. That's a good blurb. Yeah, that is it for what I read this month. My plans for next month are more Lois McMaster Bujold. I'm going to be reading some more Penric and Desdemona. Then I plan on finishing a bunch of stuff that's kind of on my to-read list. I started The Brass Cupcake by John D. MacDonald. That is his first novel. It is the most like noir-ass noir detective story I think I've ever read. I don't mean that in a bad way. It is just chock full of all the tropes you would expect. And being his first novel, I wouldn't put it past him that he wrote it that way intentionally just to get published as a novelist instead of a short story writer, which he had been up until that point. And other than that, I've got things I want to start working on. When I finish the Penric and Desdemona stuff, I'm going to immediately go into The Curse of Chalion and the rest of the World of the Five Gods books. That might happen next month. I'm not sure. I have the first Nero Wolfe novel by Rex Stout queued up and ready to go. Maybe I'll do that. And I'm still chipping away at Earth Abides. I really like that book, but it is such a slow burn that I prefer to give it a couple hours on audio. I really like the narrator, and then just come back to it a few weeks later. I just finished part 1, which I thought was a really good kind of stopping point because there's a time skip of about a year. And so I'll get back to it this month as well and slowly chip away at it. And other than that, I'm definitely still in my vibe reading mode, and I'm about to get a new e-reader. Hopefully it gets here in the next few days, and that is going to drastically change my reading plans. My wife is using my e-reader, and she is currently finishing up The White Rose, and she's gotten to like the 85% point where things have gotten real. So I'm looking forward to her finishing that so we can chat about it. And when it comes to videos, I want to do a John D. MacDonald video soon, where I cover the entire Travis McGee series, just give like a little brief blurb for each one and talk about what makes the series so great, kind of what I've observed over reading it for the last 6 months. It's 21 books. Like I said, it's probably one of the best series ever written in the genre. I really want to make that video because I feel like more people need to read those. And the fact that they are all available as audiobooks, ebooks, and they finally reprinted them all, more people need to be reading them. But I think that's it. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these or you have any suggestions for what I should read based on this stuff. If you have any video ideas, throw those down there too, because sometimes it's hard to figure out what I want to film. And I really do like making videos based on my suggestions in the comments. I made a baseball video for 2 people that watch my videos. So even if it's hyper niche, I might do it. Thanks for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.